Heidi Duong, welcome to Green Pill. First question, will you take the green pill?
Yes, I will.
That's awesome. So Heidi is an LMHC, CCHT, CPC, and CCTP out of Aberdeen, Washington. Today we're going to talk about the mind-body-spirit connection and Heidi's own personal journey towards founding Cosmic Energy Counseling, LLC, her own journey through addictive tendencies, her own mental health issues, partially that, and how she's alchemized that and used those practices which helped her to help her clients and patients. So Heidi, could you tell us your story about how you got into learning about the mind, body, spirit connection?
Yeah, about 7 years ago, I had looked up different guided meditations. And when I had looked up the different guided meditations, I was active in my alcoholism. And I didn't know where to turn. I had a lot of trust issues. And then when I started to connect more with the mind, body, spirit connection, and I started to learn about self hypnosis and started studying about Hypnosis Motivation Institute, which is where I became a clinical hypnotherapist. I was able to discover that there are different ways of healing the whole mind, body, spirit connection away from addictions, away from other mental health issues. And in the process, a few years later, I decided to pick up Hypnosis Motivation Institute after I became fully licensed as an LMHC. And I went to school at Aspen University, where I got a master's in psychology and addiction studies. And integrating the two of hypnosis and mental health therapy has done wonders for both myself as well as some of my clients.
And it's a powerful story that you're referencing. Just 7 years back, so we're talking like 2016 or so, you were active in your alcohol addiction and you were able to use both meditation, hypnotherapy, self-hypnotherapy. And what other guidance did you seek from others? Did you seek out therapy? Did you seek out hypnosis? And what else got you through and to the point where you were no longer in addiction, in an active addiction?
I sought out therapy as well as 12-step groups,
Mm-hmm.
such as Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. And during that time period, about 7 years ago, I was able to focus in on my self-care because I had a DUI a few years ago, in 2016. And so I decided to change my life right around that time. And I was doing a lot of financial insurance sales and I was working in a lot of different industries. And so during that time period, I had decided that I needed to do something different. So when I picked up hypnotherapy, I started to realize that I can start to see improvements inside of myself by also reaching out to people in the community who are other hypnotherapists. I was in mental health therapy for years, as well as a certified peer counselor, meaning someone who's in recovery and who's someone who's part of the leadership of different behavioral health organizations and helping people to realize that recovery is possible away from different mental health and substance abuse issues.
And so when you had that catalyst to change your life, which was, seems like the DUI and maybe some other things that happened during that time, was it an instant deep dive for you into mindfulness, meditation, and hypnotherapy? Was it gradual? Like, how did it go for you? And what steps did you take, including AA and A?
Yeah, I did a combination of both AA as well as hypnotherapy. And I had decided because I was still in the insurance industry, I was still working as a life, health, property, and casualty insurance agent.
Gotcha.
And I realized that I needed to take a turn, that I wanted to focus more on holistic wellness and get more out of the financial industry. And as I did that, I started to realize that there is a lot of opportunities to grow spiritually. There's a lot of things to learn from others within a community, such as I was part of a certified peer counseling community as well as different mental health therapists, which I was able to learn from others and grow professionally and personally 7 years ago until about 3 years ago. I have developed my own independent practice, focusing on all different aspects of addiction, as well as anxiety, post traumatic symptoms, generalized anxiety disorder, a lot of ADHD, and neurocognitive disorders. Oh, I'm able to also be part of a community of other providers through Mindful Therapy Group, which I started back in October of 2020. So I've been learning, growing professionally since about 7 years ago. And spirituality has played a huge part of my own recovery. And also, I've seen how hypnotherapy and energy healing modalities can also help my clients. And so I've implemented quite a bit of that. And I was seeing depression and anxiety scores go down, seeing huge transformations in others just by other people choosing to become more spiritual.
And so today, the folks who walk in your door, you noted with generalized anxiety, with depression, suffering from addiction, ADHD or AD, etc. And you really have so many tools in your toolkit, and you have a personal. Do you pick which tool to use for each person, or how does that work, like in the first session with folks?
In the first session, we'll go over a biopsycho social spiritual assessment where we'll discuss some of the biological components, such as medications that the client is taking,
Hmm.
if there is any biological or hereditary conditions in the family, psychological conditions, meaning if they've had different experiences in the past with being diagnosed with different things, sociological, meaning that different relationships will be looked at in the first session, and then also spiritual. If spirituality is something that's important to the client, and if it is, exploring more of what kind of spirituality is important to that person and looking at their whole cultural identification.
How would you define spirituality when you talk about it with folks?
Spirituality is part of being present and in the moment, meaning that if you're able to believe in yourself, if you're able to find some of those concepts of practicing acceptance and not turning against yourself and accepting your emotions, becoming fully aware of your moment and not trying to think ahead or try to think in the past, you're practicing spirituality just by being present.
Mhm. And do you find, I can imagine that folks who otherwise might be turned off by the word spirituality, when you explain it as a mindful approach to the present moment, might be more turned on by it. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I've seen people who are atheists and agnostics and people who don't have a whole lot of spiritual beliefs. However, by practicing more mindfulness in our sessions, they're able to become more spiritual beings, even if they don't believe in anything spiritually. They're still able to have more of a spiritual presence inside of themselves by practicing more mindfulness and being present.
And so when you talk about the spirit that someone has within themselves, and if they don't believe in a higher power per se, or if they're not sure about it, and they don't have such a lineage or cultural background of Catholicism or Judaism or Muslim or what have you, Islam, so you help them to understand that the present moment where they are today has meaning. Is that where you're driving towards, which is meaning? How would you think about it when people are like, well, what do you mean? Like, how is the present moment spiritual? What do you say to that?
That's an excellent question. I would say that the present moment is what you're experiencing right now, physically, emotionally, what your body cues are telling you, what your emotional cues are telling you. Slowly checking in with yourself and being able to recognize what you're going through. A lot of self awareness. That's being in the present moment. And if you're able to draw attention to these things, then you're able to heal more of those different areas where you have a lot of pain and tension in the body. However, if you're unable to be present in the moment, then you may not be able to check in with some of those things.
And that feeling of being present, can you tie that, or how do you tie that back to meaning, finding meaning in life, meaning finding purpose, finding desire, finding vigor, finding passion? Some of the synonyms I think about, especially when you have someone who's gone through really tough things, like it might be sexual trauma, it might be deep addiction stemming from family violence, it might be et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, fill in the blanks of tough human experiences. And they find that life for them is godless, right? Or maybe questioning whether even there is a God, and somewhat meaningless. How do you help such a person reconnect to purpose and meaning?
Great question. I went to school as well at the International Church of Metaphysical Humanism, and I earned a doctorate in metaphysical humanism. And one of the things that is taught within the education is a life paragon where there's a pyramid similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs of if you're able to reach out to your physical and physiological needs at the bottom, for example, and you're able to have your basic necessities met, that's at the bottom. Then you move towards love and belonging and self-esteem. In the middle of all of that, there's also safety and security. And if you're able to feel positive within yourself, finding your purpose, or even finding that you're a worthy person, you can sometimes move more into the self-completion process where you might feel like you're stuck if you're not able to see your true potential. However, you go through different life stages as you move up this ladder of becoming more whole inside of yourself. You can start sensing more of your purpose. And most important thing is to try to address where the person is at that moment. For example, if the person is experiencing challenges with finding a purpose in their lives, then being able to meet them where they're at, talk to them about different issues. And then as you're talking to them about different issues, try to find those positive moments in that person's life, such as if they say, I've had a lot of traumatic experiences around relationships. Asking that person, when was the last time that you had a positive experience? And if you're unable to recognize that, let's try to imagine or visualize what that might look like. Lead them through a hypnotic induction, meaning that you might ask them to become comfortable, find a comfortable place in their chair or wherever they're at, and try to lead them into different guided meditations where the person might be able to discover more of what would create more of that purpose.
Hmm. And so it's the first step is evaluating where they are on a pyramid of with needs at the bottom, physical needs, then love and connection somewhere in the middle. And when there's some love and connection in life, then there can be more self-completion on purpose and goals or on the why of life. So it's the what, the how, or maybe the what, the love, and the why. And you use different embodying practices like hypnotherapy to talk through what an awesome future might look like for them or what an awesome past was. So it's in some ways reorienting them towards the positive with your modalities. Do you talk about, I heard the self completion being at the top of the pyramid. Does this philosophy or others you use connect to groups and the community? Because you mentioned it was quite important to you to have this peer group.
Yeah,
There's a
definitely.
question there somewhere. It does.
Depends on if you're looking at, yeah, it depends on if you're looking at things individually or collectivistically, meaning that individually, you might find what gives you a sense of purpose. However, if, let's say, you're experiencing challenges with finding that inner purpose, then reaching out more to a multi systematic viewpoint of there are different systems in place, such as different 12-step recovery groups, different therapy groups, different peer groups, where you can make more connections and reach out to people who have had similar experiences. And through the process of that, you can gain more insights into what would help your situation. And you can also provide positive help and support towards others. And collectivistically, you can feel self-complete, such as within Alcoholics Anonymous, there's many principles that are put in place. And it was established in 1935. And since that time period, individuals have been using those principles. And it has helped. It has worked for different people. However, collectivistically, finding what works for you, what kind of groups help, reaching out to a community, that is essential to feeling more safe and secure and whole inside of yourself.
And it sounds like we're almost talking about the subject of loneliness often, which comes with certainly addiction and certainly extreme anxiety and depression. If there's a social phobia or just a desire to be by oneself, because there's social anxiety. And so it almost gets back to loneliness. And I find people in my age, like early, mid 30s, even 40s, really most ages, but especially past the 20s, find themselves, friends move away, friends have kids, people move, and social circles change, and they find themselves a little bit unmoored. They're like, oh, I don't know how to make friends in this new city I just moved to. And when people are resistant to joining these groups, like meetup groups or mutual support groups, as you mentioned, how do you counsel them to take the first step? And touches a bit on behavioral principles of taking the first step in coaching rather than doing the whole thing. Like when there's resistance, what will benefit them, and they've even mentioned being lonely. How do you help people to take the first step on finding a group?
Every individual has a different set of needs, which means that if that individual is looking more at their cultural identity, such as there's a lot of people who might identify with different socioeconomic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, racial, sexual identity backgrounds. And if you're able to identify what kind of cultural identity you have,
Mhm.
starting from that and then building up in those areas, such as maybe at that time, the individual might not be ready or may not feel safe joining different support groups. However,
Mhm.
each individual is different and treating them that way accordingly.
And if someone's in addiction, or maybe they're not in addiction, but let's just say they used to party a lot and they're not compulsive drinkers or users of narcotics, but still they want to stay away from that world. And maybe they're not so connected to their family's religion or their family's cultural experience. Where do they start when I find this a lot with people I know and people I talk to, where they're in a new city and they don't really have so many hobbies. Their hobby might be drinking beer and riding a bike, and like maybe they start at the biking group. But I guess, how do you help folks open up their world based on their specific needs and their specific identity?
You would ask them what's important to them, such as individuals who are in their late 20s to their 40s generally are moving into early adulthood, into middle adulthood, and trying to find more of that work family life balance. And if you're unable to, let's say, have a certain balance, such as people who are in active addiction and they feel that their lives are out of control, maybe they're placing work as first priority or they're placing other things as first priority. Being able to reach out, try to figure out why it is that they're placing other things above others and doing more of a life inventory of this is what is most important to this person. This is their top 3 priorities.
Hmm.
And if you're able to talk more about their life issues and why they continue to have certain challenges and address more what's important to them, then you can bring up those incongruencies, such as a person might say, I need help when it comes to my impulsive behaviors. At
Hmm.
that point, you can dive deeper and say, tell me more about your impulsive behaviors. What
Hmm.
are you prioritizing first in your life? What gets neglected? And as you're able to address more of those areas that get neglected, you're able to have more of a discussion of let's bring those areas up more towards the forefront and try to think more of motivational interviewing. Where are you at in making certain changes in your life? Are you feeling like there are some issues? However, you're not ready to plan for them yet. You're just meeting the person where they're at, different life stages, and their priorities list.
The inventory, right? The inventory of where they are and where they want to be, and then putting their behaviors into the context of what they told you there. So in many ways, your role is to guide them towards where they want to be. And you and I have touched on this previously, I believe. And I always use my motto, if I can talk about myself for a moment, which is I help people get from where they are to where they want to be, or I help them get from not okay to okay. And then sometimes from okay to thriving. But for me, it's got to be okay, not okay to okay first. And so how do you recommend holistic practices to folks when it comes to their sleep, their food, their exercise, their sunlight, their device usage? Because many of the things we touched on today were about meaning and priorities. And those are probably fundamental. And yet, if you're not sleeping enough, or you're disordered eating, or you're consuming alcohol in excess, et cetera, like it's really hard to get to meaning or to love or to self-completion in that pyramid you mentioned. So how do you counsel with that context? How do you counsel folks around those behavioral and lifestyle practices?
It's important to get more into depth about where that person is lacking in their life, such as, let's say that they're lacking sleep. Addressing that more from a holistic perspective would mean addressing 8 different areas of wellness, which is also mentioned by Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. You could go into a conversation about physical, emotional, intellectual, financial, social, spiritual aspects, and try to gain some context of where that person is spending their time and where they're prioritizing things, and doing more of a life balance chart, because a lot of times life is oftentimes imbalanced. And unless you're able to fully see it, and oftentimes, depending on the individual, writing it out can be helpful, such
Hmm.
as I'm spending 4 hours a night sleeping, and the rest of the time I'm looking at social media for 4 hours at night, even though I have 8 hours available to me to sleep. I'm experiencing challenges in falling asleep at night, and addressing more of that spiritual side, maybe doing a guided meditation or doing some breathing exercise that can help you in that moment at night, incorporating more of that in, adding that into your wellness inventory, and then looking at it more from a holistic perspective, because addressing all of these different areas within one person is a lot of different areas. It's a lot of work. It's constant checking in and evaluating with oneself, and evaluating with different clients and seeing where they're at, where they're spending their time on different things, and helping them to make modifications if they feel like things are imbalanced.
It is echoing what you said about it's a lot to change for one person, or it's a lot to think about. when you're talking about meaning, priorities, what's important, relationships, work, family, but that's the boat we're all in. And nobody doesn't need to sleep. Nobody doesn't need to eat to survive, drink water. Yeah, social media, I think we could survive without, but ultimately you can only cover so much in your session. When I work with someone, I can only cover so much, and people only have the capacity for so much, although people really are really powerful and really can make a lot of change quickly, as you did 7 years ago, which I can't believe how many degrees you have after your name. I've interviewed maybe 20 therapists and you might have the most, and that's probably all in 7 years, I imagine. So it's really a testament to when you believe in something and when you find your purpose, when you find something that works for you, you dive all in on it. So Heidi Duong, thank you for coming on. Is there any last message you'd like to get out to the world about mind, body, spirit connection, really anything of cosmic energy counseling, anything you just recommend to folks out there struggling or who want to be okay? Any message you want to get out there?
Yeah. Love and compassion is essential, meaning that if you're able to at least practice self acceptance and get to that point, feeling okay with yourself, maybe it takes some time reaching out to different communities. Maybe there's different things that will work for you and not others. That's okay. Practicing that acceptance and recognizing what works for you and what doesn't, and trying different healing modalities is essential. And being able to stay present in the moment and checking in with yourself.
Thank you. I hope folks listen to that, and I'm going to listen myself and practice that self acceptance. So thank you so much for coming on Green Pill. Where can people find you and your practice online?
I have a website, Cosmic Energy Counseling,
Mm-hmm.
LLC.net.
Mm-hmm. .net. Okay. Great. That is a good place to start, and we will link that in the notes below for folks. Thank you again.